Very interesting piece by Francis Martel at Breitbart.com. In a tell-all autobiography, to be released in English this year, Fidel Castro's former bodyguard asserts that while head of the state, the Cuban dictator ran cocaine and marijuana trafficking operations like a godfather. The bodyguard also claims Castro executed some of his top officers to prevent further international attention for bolstering violent drug cartels. You know, all the talk, ladies and gentlemen, about Castro and romanticizing these genocidal maniacs and their phony revolution, and how Obama reaches out to his little brother, you need to know these people they are tyrants. Juan Ronaldo Sanchez worked as Castro's bodyguard for 17 years before being imprisoned for trying to retire in 1994. Let me stop here for a minute and address something. Pamela Geller, the individual who has taken it to the Islamos and did in Texas with her Muhammad Drawing Project, which was intended to make a point about the First Amendment, is under now relentless assault on every single cable channel, including Fox. Well, she should have done it a better way. Well, it really doesn't serve anybody's purpose. Well, she's a kook. Well, she's a nobody. Absolutely incredible to me. Absolutely incredible to me. And then they say, well, nobody's been tougher than I against the jihadists. Well, of course not. Nobody's been tougher than a talker about the jihadists. But we're talking about the American constitutional system. Oh, yeah, it's about free speech, but it's just stupid. Stupid. Well, what was stupid about it? I didn't even see these drawings, Mr. Producer. Are they available somewhere? I don't know. How do we know they weren't honorable? But it's just pathetic, the piling on, the groupthink, people who, well, I'm a conservative, but what? I had to mention it because it's just, I can see what's happening now. This happens all the time. So if somebody becomes controversial or provocative, quote unquote, they start throwing them under the bus as fast as they can. So back to this former bodyguard to Castro. Juan Ronaldo Sanchez worked as his bodyguard 17 years. He was in prison because he wanted to retire in 1994. The New York Post notes he only arrived in Texas after 10 attempts to escape and is now releasing an English-language version of his book, The Double Life of Fidel Castro, at a time when many in the White House have claimed that the Cuban regime should no longer be treated as a rogue entity. In an excerpt published by the Post, Sanchez writes that he listened in on a conversation between Castro and Jose Abrantes. Abrantes was once the nation's Minister of the Interior, in which Castro orchestrated a deal with a drug trafficker to keep his business. The man would keep working with the Castro government if he could for $75,000 purchase of a vacation near Havana with his family. Very simply, a huge drug trafficking transaction was being carried out at the highest echelons of the state, writes Sanchez, and this is when he became disillusioned with the Castro revolution. Took that long? Here's what he says. I realized the man for whom I had long sacrificed my life, the leader whom I worshipped like a god and who counted more in my eyes than my own family, was caught up in cocaine trafficking to such an extent that he was directing illegal operations like a real godfather. Sanchez notes that it was strategically beneficial to Castro to work in the drug trade because it corrupted and destabilized American society. Well, much like Obama, so they have something in common there. Not long after this conversation, Sanchez writes, American officials began investigating possible links between Castro and drug trafficking. Rather than let the situation continue and risk his discovery, his complicity, Castro sacrificed two of his highest-ranking men, Abrantes, the Interior Minister, and General Arnaldo Ochoa, who made his name fighting for communism in Africa with Cuban troops. Abrantes died in jail of suspicious circumstances. In other words, he was murdered. Ochoa, the hand-picked Castro general, was executed. Sanchez says, Castro made us watch it. That's what the Comandante was capable of to keep his power, not just of killing, but also of humiliating and reducing to nothing men who had served him devotedly, writes Sanchez, describing the execution video in detail. The New York Slimes wrote at the time of the testimony of those at the Ochoa trial in 1989, words that match Sanchez's today. Quote, Cuban military officers testify that they sold diamonds, fish, sugar, rum, and electronic equipment on the black market in Angola to obtain hard currency for Cuba. One witness, Lieutenant Colonel Arnaldo Marjan Plot, testified that General Ochoa had told him such sales had been authorized by the Castro brothers. Even then, experts in Miami stated Ochoa may have been running a drug operation, but that it was secondary to an official operation sanctioned by Fidel and Raul Castro. As a side fact, Raul has often been said to be, a same-sexer. Let me put it that way. Sanchez's story has not changed since he released his book in Spanish. He told one news outlet, Castro trafficked in drugs, arms, and diamonds. He said, I saw that he was capable of killing a man close to him, General Ochoa, who he executed, and thought of what could happen to me. Now, Castro's ties to violent drug trafficking, once again relevant in light of Obama. No, that's not relevant anymore, because Obama doesn't give a crap. Sanchez also confirmed Cuba not only provided safe harbor to FARC terrorists, F-A-R-C, FARC terrorists, those are the Colombian terrorists, but helped train them to fight Colombian soldiers. Well, of course, this is why we need to reach out to Castro. People were saying, I saw even phony free market libertarian economists saying, we need to put more Taco Bells out there. And then, of course, we'll see free market capitalism will just flourish because, the Castros won't be stealing or ripping anybody off. No, they're not like the mob. No, they're just hung up on drugs and diamonds. They would never tap into all these businesses and all the money pouring into Cuba from America. Never. So there you have it. In addition to being a genocidal maniac, slaughtering other human beings, torturing them, throwing them in gulags, well, the Castro brothers were involved in, and are, in drug trading, among other things. But I guess that's okay. We have a new period of détente.